for you. Huge. Because what that means is, and I know this is true because I have spoken with adults who say, I never read until I had my first child, and then for whatever reason I picked up a book and I started reading to my children. I started reading and I began to fall in love with, for example, Dr. Seuss. The sun did not shine, it was too wet to play, so we sat in that house all that cold, cold, wet day. The opening lines of Cat in the Hat. And she said, I started reading to my child, and I was like, this is amazing. These books are amazing. Which led her then, she said, to read a few other books. But in her life, she said she had never read in her youth. She had read, of course, like we have to do in 303. But technically, that's not always reading, is it? When you have to do it, that's not really reading. Reading is when you pick up something because you really want to. Let's jump now to level 3 and how we can relate to an essay like this. Of course, we can begin right away to ask about what are the classic texts that promote the reading of books. I'm going to have you write down a poem that I'm going to teach you as a senior called Keats Upon First Looking into Chapman's Homer. John Keats is the poet. And the title of the poem is Upon First Looking into Chapman's Homer. We often will just abbreviate the poem to Chapman's Homer. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Where in this poem, a sonnet, Keats writes about reading a new translation, new old translation of Chapman's Iliad. And he talks about how amazing it is to be a reader and how amazing it is to stumble onto a new idea. Now that's one of the things that we have to begin to think a little bit about as we go into level 3, and that is this question. Do you think times have changed since Rita Dove was a child? For example, when was the last time you were even in a library? I have lots of students that say, you know what, I went into the high school library a few times in the years I was in high school, but not very often. And most of the time it was because somebody made me go in there. But the last time I was in the county library, for example, when I walked in there, the last time, if at all, might have been when I was a really young child. A lot of students will say, you know, I kind of understand what her passion is for books, but can I say this without insult? It's not books for me, it's video games. And I don't want to get like, I don't want to insult anybody, the students will often say to me, but I know what she's talking about. I can tell you the very first time I played certain video games. I can tell you when I finished those games. I can tell you when I looked back several years later and went, you know what? I should like pick up that game and play it again. You know how they do this every once in a while? They play those retro games and then they come back and then everybody starts playing them again. You know how that is? How is that any different from rereading a book that you read when you were a kid? Let's point out something for level 3 that I want you to at least be challenged to consider. It's all about ideas and the engaging of ideas. For many, many years, that has come through reading. But let's be honest, it doesn't have to come just through reading. It can come through other kinds of ways as well. What you want, what you seek, what you need, Aristotle said, as a human being, what you need is to be able to experience new ideas, where you're challenged to think about the world in a different way. And if that for you is video games, then so be it. I had a mother that said, my son refuses to read, but all he does is play video games. I said, tonight, stand where you can hide yourself and watch him play for 20 minutes and don't look away. And just watch how much he reads. She confided to me the next day that 8 minutes in, she stepped in, freaked him out, and she said, honey, you're reading. And he goes, what? What are you talking? She said, you just had stuff up on the screen, barely up there. And then you were closing it out. Were you actually reading that? Well, yeah. The young man knew how to read. It's just he didn't pick up the works of Shakespeare to read. He was reading in the process of playing his game. Of course, the challenge, can we say this out loud, for those of us who are non-readers, is that you live in a world where to credential, that is to say, to get academic credentialing, you have to read. That's what school is. You have to read. The ACT is a 3-hour reading test. No matter what section you're taking. 3 hours. If you are not a reader, I don't care how much you know, you're going to struggle taking the ACT. Which is why the ACT is not an intelligence test. It doesn't test how smart you are. It tests how well you can read. And if you can't read well, you're going to struggle on that test. Of course, the real 3B question is this one now. What is your relationship to books? Do you relate to this at all? Or do you kind of look at Rita Dove and go, what a nerd, really? Books? Are you serious with me? How they smell? What is wrong with you, right? Or are you more inclined to say that, you know, that you really do understand what she's talking about, and you can maybe even remember a time in your life when books for you were so unbelievable. I've had students that, for example, will say, I don't really read like this kind of stuff, but I do read other kinds of stuff. For example, I love manga or comics or that kind of thing, or, you know, those kind of comic novels and that type of thing. I love that kind of thing. I just don't read this kind of thing. What is for you, are you ready for this question? What is for you the most important single read of your life? Do you have one? Do you have one book, one poem, one story, one essay that maybe is more important in your life than any other? And for those of you who are non-readers, let me ask it this way then. What is the most important idea you ever engaged in through some kind of text? Notice when we talk about texts at 2A, we don't say what it just is that you've read. When we talk about text, we're talking about everything that you've been exposed to, from TV to videos to songs to everything else. Of course, I've had students that point out, I guess I really never thought about that, but the albums that I really love, I know all the lyrics to those songs. And guess what? The way I learned those lyrics was not just to listen to them, but to read them. I'd either download them or I'd have them there and I'd read them. And then I'd learn them and I'd read what exactly was being said. That's poetry. I was reading that stuff. Right? Well, there you go. For the love of books, Rita Dove. I hope maybe it's challenged you to think a little bit about the beauty of reading.